welcome to Chore Chapters, because everyday tasks need good company. I'm Leo, and with me as always, we have got Luna.
Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today we've got a thrilling and interesting story lined up, so grab your headphones and let's dive straight into the story.
Imagine this. It's pretty unsettling. Your own government may be experimenting with mind control
Right.
and using its own citizens, people who had no idea they were part of some experiment.
And right at the center of it all, this figure, this man who's just such a paradox.
Yeah, a gentle family man living off the grid, milking goats, meditating.
But also the CIA's chief poisoner. Their poisoner-in-chief.
It's a jarring contrast, isn't it?
Almost impossible to reconcile, and that's really the heart of the story we're getting into today.
Exactly. So today, we're doing a deep dive into the, frankly, shocking history of the CIA's Project MKUltra.
Mm-hmm.
And to help us navigate this, we've got quite a stack of sources.
We do.
There's Stephen Kinzer's biography of the project's architect, Sidney Gottlieb. We've got declassified government documents from the National Security Archive.
Really crucial stuff in there.
Yeah, and reports from the Church Committee investigation. That was huge. Plus the CIA's own FOIA page on MKUltra, and even President Ford's executive order trying to stop this kind of thing.
So our mission, really, is to unpack what all these sources tell us about this really dark, bizarre chapter in U.S. history.
We want to highlight the key players, the methods they use. Some are just wild, the motivations behind it all.
And the impact, the lasting, often tragic impact on people's lives and, on the trust between the government and citizens.
So get ready for some pretty unsettling facts, things that might make you question a lot.
Definitely.
Let's start with that central figure you mentioned, Sidney Gottlieb. The sources paint such a contradictory picture.
They really do. Kinzer's book calls him a visionary chemist, sure, but also the CIA's master magician.
And the nicknames.
Yeah, the epithets range from, dirty trickster, which sounds almost playful, to the really chilling ones. Dr. Death, Washington's official poisoner.
It's that contrast again. The sources say he saw himself as spiritual, lived simply, remote cabin, no running water.
Meditated, milked goats.
Right. But this same guy directed these incredibly brutal, unethical experiments as head of MKUltra.
He joined the CIA in the early 50s, and Allen Dulles greenlit MKUltra in 1953. Gottlieb ran it right through the late 60s, maybe even with bits lasting till 73.
And it wasn't just mind control, was it? His job seems much bigger than that.
Oh, much bigger. He headed the technical services staff, basically becoming the CIA's go-to guy for spy gadgets and, poisons.
Poisons?
Yeah, his team developed pills, powders, potions designed to kill, disable, or manipulate people covertly, often untraceably.
The sources even mention specific targets.
They do. There are references to developing things aimed at foreign leaders. Fidel Castro is often mentioned as an example.
So what drove this? Why did the CIA feel this intense need for mind control and secret chemicals?
Well, the sources point squarely at the Cold War. There was this pervasive fear, this belief within the CIA.
That the other side was already doing it.
Exactly. That the Soviets, the Chinese, the North Koreans were using advanced mind control, brainwashing techniques on U.S. prisoners of war.
So MKUltra was a reaction, an attempt to catch up or get ahead.
Pretty much. It was seen as an urgent necessity to develop their own capabilities for interrogating spies, manipulating foreign leaders, that sort of thing.
Understanding that fear helps frame the why, I guess. But it still doesn't excuse the what.
Not at all.
And MKUltra wasn't their first attempt at this kind of research, right?
No, definitely not. The sources show clear predecessors. It goes back to programs like Project Chatter in 47.
Then Bluebird in 1950.
Which quickly became Project Artichoke in 51.
And some of these had disturbing links back even further to Operation Paperclip.
That's right, the post-WWI program that brought over former Nazi scientists.
Some of whom had experience in torture and brainwashing techniques.
A really chilling connection. And those early projects, Chatter, Bluebird, Artichoke, they were explicitly focused on mind control, interrogation, behavior modification.
What does Artichoke involve specifically?
They were experimenting with combining drugs, narcosis with hypnosis, trying to break people down during interrogation.
And they tested this.
Yeah, sources mention testing these techniques on suspected Russian agents, trying to induce amnesia, regression, make them more suggestible.
Okay, so MKUltra wasn't born in a vacuum. It built on this earlier work, but just exploded the scope.
Exploded is a good word. It was vast. That 1963 Inspector General report, one of the key documents that survived, really highlights the breadth.
It wasn't just drugs.
Oh, no. Far beyond drugs. They were looking into radiation, electroshock, psychology, psychiatry, sociology, anthropology, even graphology, studying handwriting.
Handwriting. For what?
Presumably for profiling, maybe seeing if you could manipulate someone based on it, plus harassment substances, paramilitary devices. It really sounds like they were trying absolutely anything, no matter how weird or disturbing.
Yeah, trying to build a whole arsenal for covert, biological, chemical, even radiological warfare.
And a huge part of that was the chemical side, run by Gottlieb's team. What were they actually trying to create?
That 1955 list from his chemical division, it's terrifying. They wanted substances to
Promote illogical thinking. Make hypnosis easier.
help people withstand torture. Or maybe make it easier to torture someone.
Produce amnesia.
Yeah.
Induce shock, confusion, paralysis.
Alter personality. Create pure euphoria.
And, of course, the classic knockout pill.
So, reading that list, it's clear they weren't just after a simple truth serum.
Not even close.
They wanted tools to fundamentally control a person's mind, memory, emotions, body, for spying, for covert ops.
Total manipulation. Total incapacitation potential. That was the goal.
And this brings us to the absolute core of it, the part that's just profoundly disturbing, the human experiments.
This wasn't theoretical for them. It was very real.
The sources talk about this CIA doctrine,
Yeah.
right, from that 63 report.
Yeah, a really chilling doctrine. They basically argued that normal scientific testing controlled experiments wasn't good enough
Why not?
because it didn't replicate operational situations. Real-world spying or interrogation isn't neat and tidy like a lab.
So they felt they had to test these
Exactly, to see how it really worked, which led them, starting explicitly in 1955, to test on unwitting subjects in normal life settings.
unwitting subjects, American citizens.
Yes, some were maybe informants or criminals, but the sources are clear. Unwitting subjects came from all social levels, high and low, Native American and foreign.
So anyone could have been targeted.
Potentially, yes.
And where did this happen? Not just in labs?
No, it was varied. Some experiments happened in hospitals, labs, institutions, sometimes collaborating with universities. Georgetown, Emory, Rutgers, Illinois are mentioned.
But also somewhere else.
Critically, yes, a lot of it happened in secret CIA safe houses.
And there's a key name connected to those safe houses. George Hunter White.
White, yeah, he's quite a character, a federal narcotics agent, an OSS vet from WWII.
Gottlieb brought him in.
Hired him specifically to run these secret safe houses. There were operations in New York City and San Francisco.
And what did White do there?
He operated under an alias, Morgan Hall. His job was to lure people, often just ordinary, unsuspecting folks, back to these CIA-run apartments,
And then
secretly dose them with LSD or other drugs, and then watch and record what happened. Gottlieb himself and other CIA officials apparently visited to observe.
there's a particularly shocking detail in the sources about the San Francisco operation.
Yes, the prostitution angle.
Tell us about that.
It's pretty astonishing. White admitted to paying prostitutes to bring their clients back to these CIA-funded bordellos.
And the clients were drugged?
Secretly dosed with LSD, yes.
Right.
And then observed. It's just a staggering violation, using people at their most vulnerable.
And it wasn't just happening in the U.S., right? Dr. D.U. and Cameron in Canada.
Cameron's work in Montreal is another infamous part of this. At the Allen Memorial Institute.
What did he do?
Horrific experiments on psychiatric patients. The CIA funded him. We're talking drug-induced comas, massive electroshock therapy, psychic driving, playing looped messages for days.
And the Canadian government knew.
The sources indicate they were aware and even provided additional funding later. Years down the line, Canadian victims sued and got a settlement from their government.
Back in the States, there was Dr. Carl Pfeiffer at Emory.
Right, Pfeiffer was heavily involved in drug tests. The sources mention him testing large doses of LSD-25 on normal human volunteers. But these volunteers were often federal prisoners in Atlanta or juveniles in a detention center in New Jersey.
Volunteers who couldn't really volunteer.
Exactly. And the sources state bluntly that Pfeiffer's experiments left many scarred for life. He also collaborated with Dr. Harold Isbell at a research center, doing similar tests on prisoners.
LSD keeps coming up again and again. It seems central.
It really was a cornerstone drug for MKUltra. Eli Lilly apparently supplied it to the CIA in tonnage quantities, huge amounts.
Used in the unwitting tests.
Extensively, and also on thousands of volunteer soldiers, sometimes mixed with other things like BZ, which is a powerful incapacitating agent.
And Gottlieb himself took LSD.
Reportedly, yes, many times. At least 12, according to some accounts.
There's that weird historical footnote, too, linking this secret program to the 60s counterculture.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Some sources kind of position Gottlieb as this accidental hidden godfather of the counterculture.
How so?
Because the CIA's widespread testing and use of LSD contributed significantly to it leaking out beyond their control into the wider culture.
Like the Ken Kesey story.
Right. The famous story is that Ken Kesey, the author, had his first creatively formative experiences with LSD during Army tests that were part of this whole research effort.
There's a bizarre ripple effect. A mind control program accidentally fueling a cultural revolution.
But the immediate human cost for the people directly experimented on, it was just devastating.
Absolutely. Gottlieb's experiments treated people like they were disposable.
The sources are very clear on this. These drug tests, these special interrogation programs, they destroyed lives, left hundreds psychologically damaged. Some were described as permanently shattered.
And the most famous case, the one directly tied to Gottlieb dosing someone, is Frank Olson.
Frank Olson, yeah. An Army chemist involved in biological weapons research. In 1953, he was at a retreat with CIA people, including Gottlieb.
And they spiked his drink.
Secretly dosed him with LSD, yes. 10 days later, he fell to his death from a hotel window in New York, 13th floor.
Officially ruled as suicide.
Officially, yes. But the drugging, the suspicious circumstances like his roommate that night being Gottlieb's own deputy, Robert Lashbrook, led his family and many others to question that ruling for decades.
The government eventually admitted the drugging played a role.
They did, years later in 1976. They gave the family a settlement, offered apologies, but yeah, questions still linger about exactly what happened that night.
It just underscores the human cost, the recklessness, and they tried very hard to keep all this hidden.
Extremely hard. Gottlieb operated in intense secrecy for 22 years.
The sources talk about a philosophy of minimum documentation.
Right, and relying heavily on need to know to limit who knew what, even inside the CIA.
And then the cover-up became literal destruction.
In 1973, yeah. The CIA director at the time, Richard Helms, reportedly acting on Gottlieb's advice, ordered all the MKUltra files destroyed, burned.
Which made later investigations incredibly difficult.
Impossible to know the full scope, really. A deliberate act to erase the history.
So, if most files were destroyed, how did any of this ever come out?
Primarily through two major investigations in 1975. The Church Committee in the Senate and the Rockefeller Commission set up by President Ford.
And what do they have to work with?
Mostly sworn testimony from people involved and the few documents that survived the shredding.
Like that 1963 Inspector General report we keep mentioning.
Exactly. It survived, but apparently it didn't have a lot of the nitty-gritty details about specific experiments.
But then there was a breakthrough. Some records did survive.
A crucial one, yeah. In 1977, the new CIA director, Stansfield Turner, announced they'd found about 20,000 pages of financial records related to MKUltra.
Financial records, how did they survive?
They'd just been stored somewhere else, missed the destruction order. Pure luck, maybe.
And those became vital.
Hugely important. They allowed investigators and journalists, like John Marks, for his book, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, to follow the money and piece together a lot of the program's activities.
What happened to Gottlieb himself after all this?
It's, again, complex. After he retired, some people who knew him described him as calm, spiritual even.
But haunted.
Also reportedly haunted by what he'd done. Sources say his own children wouldn't speak to him. He did cooperate to some extent with later investigations.
Like what?
He gave a deposition for a lawsuit by one of the Canadian victims, and he answered questions from the CIA itself in '79 about the safe houses and the unwitting tests. He estimated maybe 40 specific tests for operational use.
Which leads to the big question. Where was the oversight during all those years? Did anyone inside the CIA try to stop this?
There were some signs of internal unease. That same 1963 Inspector General report was actually pretty
What
critical.
did it say?
It concluded that testing on unwitting Americans carried excessive risk to the agency and flat out recommended stopping it.
But Gottlieb didn't want to stop.
No, he and Richard Helms, who was deputy director for plans then, argued strongly against ending the unwitting tests.
So what happened?
The director of Central Intelligence basically kicked the can down the road, deferred a final decision, but asked for a freeze on testing on U.S. citizens.
But the freeze wasn't permanent, or wasn't enforced.
Apparently never formally lifted, according to the sources, and the program continues. So yeah, some internal awareness, but not enough to actually stop the abuses for years.
And that failure of internal controls what ultimately led to things like the Church Committee.
Absolutely. The Church Committee was a watershed moment, a bipartisan look into illegal activities across the intelligence community.
MKUltra was just one part of it.
A big part, but yeah, they uncovered a lot more. Attempted assassinations by the CIA, Castro, Trujillo, Lumumba, the FBI's COINTELPRO program targeting domestic groups.
Project Mockingbird, involving journalists.
Reportedly, yes, and NSA surveillance programs like Minaret and Shamrock spying on Americans, even members of Congress.
Wow. And the biological weapons angle.
They also exposed MK Naomi, a joint CIR Army project for developing and stockpiling biological agents. Kind of a parallel track to MKUltra.
It sounds like a portrait of agencies running wild with little accountability.
That was very much the picture painted. And these explosive revelations finally forced real reforms.
Like President Ford's executive order.
EO 11-1805 in 1976, yeah, it explicitly banned political assassinations. And crucially for this story, it put major restrictions on human drug testing.
Also,
Required informed, written, witnessed consent, mandated following strict ethical guidelines, trying to prevent the unwitting testing nightmare.
what other safeguards were put in place?
Key things were the Permanent Intelligence Oversight Committees set up in the Senate and the House in 76 and 77.
For ongoing congressional scrutiny.
Exactly. Plus the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, in 78, requiring court warrants for spying on U.S. citizens. And that same executive order also created the Intelligence Oversight Board within the White House.
Trying to build in layers of accountability.
Layers that just hadn't existed before or hadn't worked.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, we've really traced the dark, twisted path of Project MKUltra, from its origins in post-war paranoia and programs like Paperclip, through the really bizarre figure of Sidney Gottlieb.
This gentle goat milker and master poisoner.
So the horrifying human experiments in those safe houses, hospitals, prisons, the deliberate destruction of records to cover it all up.
And then the eventual, though incomplete, revelations from investigations like the Church Committee, which finally led to some significant reforms.
Reforms aimed at preventing anything like it from happening again.
And, you know, this history, it isn't just some artifact of the past. It forces you to confront these really big, ongoing questions.
About government power, about accountability.
Right. The balance between keeping the nation safe and protecting individual rights. And what happens when secrecy becomes a shield for unethical, even illegal actions, without proper checks, either internal or external.
And here's something to leave you with, pulled straight from the sources we looked at. We know most MKUltra files were intentionally destroyed. We could never know the full story.
Right.
And according to at least one former CIA veteran involved, research like MKUltra didn't actually stop when the program officially ended. It just continued, maybe under different names.
A chilling thought.
So given that we don't have the full record, and given the nature of intelligence work often requires secrecy, what does this dark history tell us about the challenges, even today, of making sure powerful government agencies operate ethically and transparently?
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out. Until next time, take care and keep your chores company.